Hello, welcome to the Skoll World Forum on Social Entrepreneurship. We're live from Oxford in the UK. I'm Michael Painter. I work at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Our foundation is the largest philanthropy in the United States focused on improving the health of the people living in the United States. We're all about helping build a better, healthier future in the United States. We call that better, healthier future a culture of health. And when we say building a healthy future, we mean for everyone. We mean that in that future, everyone would have a fair and just opportunity to live a healthy life. We're here today at Skoll talking about an aspect of building that healthy future with some incredible Indigenous leaders from the United States. Aleena Kawe and Lilian Hill. So I've introduced myself. I'm at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, but more importantly, before we get started though, I also want to say that I'm also I'm an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation from Oklahoma. I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I care deeply about Indigenous issues and have in my work and travels encountered these two amazing Indigenous leaders. So maybe we'll start with you, Lilian. Would you introduce yourself for our audience?
Yes, thank you. My name's Lilian Hill, and I come from the village of Kikotsmovi. I am from the Hopi and Quechan nations located in Arizona.
Wonderful. And Aleena?
Yes, I'm Aleena Kawe, and I'm Yaqui from Tucson, Arizona. And I'm connected with the old Basque community of the Basque Yaqui tribe.
Right. So when I started, we were talking about a better, healthier future. And we need all kinds of things go into building that better, healthier future. Certainly, if you need great doctors and nurses and hospitals, you need that. But there's many, many other things: the food we eat, the air we breathe, the soil we use to grow our foods, our jobs, our housing, all those kinds of things. And before lots of people came to the United States, there were people living there, the indigenous people of the United States, indigenous people all over the world, in fact. Who had a very unique way of living in those settings, in those ecosystems, in those environments, caring for the environment, thinking about it over millennia, developing ways and wisdom and knowledge. And so arguably one aspect of building that better, healthier future is to look back and cherish what we had in the past. And there are people holding that wisdom, and you guys are examples of that. Could you, when we talk about Indigenous knowledge and wisdom, what does that mean to you? What do you mean when we talk about that?
I can start. And so for ancestral knowledge and wisdom, I think within the context of myself and where I come from my own community, I think there are a lot of different aspects to that, and there are a lot of different ways of learning traditionally that we as Indigenous people go through. Specifically for my community, we would go through initiation processes where ceremonially we would prepare ourselves to be able to receive knowledge or culture, language, and understanding, and not only through ceremonial ways, but also through actual everyday practices. So rites of passage, as young men and women in our Native communities, we still have those intact. Within my community specifically, when young women are going through a stage where they're entering womanhood, they go through a ceremonial process of learning how to prepare traditional foods per se. Learning when men are going through their rites of passage, they learn how to farm, how to be able to provide for the family. So traditionally within Indigenous context, our life way and this idea of knowledge and traditional wisdom is very much participatory. So you have to be not only engaged within your own community, but to be able to have an understanding of the importance behind it, the significance behind why we practice our ceremonies, why we practice different practical aspects of our lives too. And so that journey doesn't happen right away, it happens through time. And that's why in our own communities, we really revere elders in our communities, because they've lived a very long time, and they've, during their lifetime, they've accumulated a lot of life lessons and stories in that way. So in our communities, we have a deep respect for those elders who not only have learned and maintained, but are willing to share that and to be able to move our culture forward in a good way. But as Indigenous people, we have been very much so interrupted in our ways and our spiritual practice through time. So
beautiful. Lena?
Yeah, well, Indigenous peoples are the original architects of systems and ways of life that kept us healthy. And those systems and ways of life were very much grounded in the knowledge of the seasons, weather patterns, wildlife, and the rivers, and all those different things. And so creating ways of life and ways of interacting with one another and with our environment was really critical to our survival. And with us, we had 3 different colonizers, starting with the Spanish, followed by the Mexican government, and then the US government. And so, a lot of the genocidal policies required us to sort of flee, some of us to flee our ancestral homes and establish homes in other places. And so adaptation has been really important in that journey. But with that, we also carry with us a responsibility for the sacrifices of those that have gone before us. And so we carry that and do our best to maintain that cultural grounding, that cultural knowledge, while moving within a contemporary context and the reality of what our people face today. And so it does require us very much to think in the old ways within that contemporary context. And I think our people have been very innovative in that space because of that process of adaptation that has happened again and again over the centuries, really. And so I think in that space, similar to what Lilian has shared, is holding on to that cultural knowledge and ways of coming through, and sharing that knowledge becomes really critical to both resilience and the persistence of our people.
So you talked about your tribe's experience with colonization and the wave after wave of that, and that's a common experience for almost virtually all Indigenous people in North America, and a similar experience around the world. I mentioned I'm an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation from Oklahoma, and the reason the Cherokee Nation, that portion of the Cherokee Nation got to Oklahoma, which was Indian Territory at the time, was because of a U.S. federal policy to remove them from their homes in North Carolina to Oklahoma. In my family's experience, what ended up happening for us was my great-grandfather decided to stop speaking the language, stop traditions, and really adapt to a white way. And so that leaves me, decades and decades later, coming to people like you to say, tell us, tell me about the ways, tell me about Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And there's a nuance to all of that, though. And we could ask for help that you guys that Indigenous people have used and held to stay resilient and stay strong in spite of all these challenges. But there's a way to ask for help and a way not to ask for help. And could you help guide people like me or anybody who is trying to learn and ask for that kind of help, how to do it and how not to do it?
I think it's really important, first and foremost, to go forward with a humble heart. And an open mind, and I think that for myself and my own experiences, I grew up in Southern California. My family had followed the railroad out as part of those genocidal policies and things, looking for work, and established a community, East Highlands, in Southern California. And and so coming up, my desire to reconnect with my culture was something that I also experienced. And the tribe is predominantly in Arizona, in communities around Tucson area and Phoenix. And so I moved back to that area, to Tucson, retraced my grandparents' steps, and just began to reconnect. And so I can't say that I came forward and necessarily asked for guidance, but I just was present. I just showed up and, shared with people, folks who my family was, where my family came from, and those connections started being made, and just began participating in the community, reconnecting with the culture, and over time that connection and that participation grew. And so one time where I do remember asking a question, I was very subtly told that, we don't ask questions, we just listen and observe, and that's what I did. And so, having been reconnected now with the community for 20 years, it has been an incredible journey, and it has brought a lot of healing to myself and to my family, because that is part of the Indigenous experience for some of us to have experienced, fleeing from circumstances to save our own lives. But I think it's up to our generation and the generations to come to reconnect and uphold those things that we know, those truths of who we are, where we come from, and what it means to be Yaqui, for me, and responding to that call. And with that, I carry that forward in my work and in my way of life.
Definitely, and I think it's important to have mutual respect and understanding from cultures, and I think within an Indigenous context, within Indigenous communities, like Aleena was sharing, there's a lot of trauma that exists within Indigenous communities because of the long history of colonization and federal Indian policies that have been very impactful within the communities themselves, not only through impacting the loss of language and culture, but also the imposition of a Western culture on our people as well. And so in a way, like I mentioned earlier, for us as Indigenous people, being within a U.S. context, one of the most powerful countries in the world, we have been impacted by the development of wealth and the development of the country itself. And so a lot of our cultural ways and understanding have been skewed in a sense as well. And so I think we are very fortunate in our native communities to be able to continue to practice tradition, to practice language and culture, and traditional ways that we're talking about. But it's very important that a culture that's seeking wisdom or understanding comes forward with a really a powerful sense of respect and understanding, because a lot of our cultural ways have been appropriated through time by the Western culture, and they've not only been appropriated, they've also been sold, and they continue to be sold. So within the context of the community where I come from, there's some ceremonial and traditional knowledge ways that are reserved for the community only. They're not broadcasted to outside of our community in particular. So there are it's important with mutual understanding and respect to know that within some Indigenous communities, it's also not appropriate to, like Aleena said, to ask questions or to want to take, that mentality within our communities has been present since Europeans set foot on our continent, that was the mentality, is what can I get from you? How can I benefit? How can I extract? And so moving forward, if this mutual understanding and respect is something that we feel very important about in regards to social justice, it's important to be able to have a foundation or a context to move forward. Otherwise, we're continuing patterns that are very negative and have been very hurtful to Indigenous communities over time.
Absolutely. Let's turn and talk a little bit about health then, and approaches to health and wellness. At our foundation, when we talk about health, we very specifically mean human health, and we don't necessarily, for better or worse, I think, necessarily think about interconnections with all living things, all non-living things, certainly. And so what is an Indigenous version of that culture of health idea, would you say? Could you talk a little bit about relations and connections and to the extent that you could generalize?
For myself and my basic understanding, I think, and what I've been taught as well, in the context of being an Indigenous person, is that everything is alive, everything has a life force to it, and everything is related to one another. And so within the context for myself and my relationship with the natural world in general, with the clouds, with the soil, with the plants, with the animals, all of these elements of life, they not only are alive, but they have meaning behind them. They have their own characteristics. They have great purpose as well. So it's important to honor these aspects and to feed them, to give gratitude to them, and not to abuse them or misuse things. And so in the context of kind of this Indigenous world view, it's important to honor and respect and to know that we are part of that. We are living natural beings that are part of the natural world. And whatever happens to nature affects us directly because we are directly tied to that. And so it's very important as stewards of Mother Earth. For my people, the Hopi, we are taught at a very young age and in our culture that we are stewards of the earth, of the water. We are stewards of the land, of the air, of the sky, of the land, the soil itself. We belong to it. And so it is we treat it just like a relative, how we would treat our mother or our children. And so it's very important for me as an Indigenous person to honor that and to really truly understand what does that mean, because in a Western context, everything is objectified. Everything is separated. But within the Indigenous context, within my upbringing as a Hopi, I was taught that not only is everything alive, but it has a spirit to it. There's beings that reside in different places that are very much so alive and connected to us, through the rivers have names. The rivers and the waters have great significance for us. And so moving forward, it's very important within an Indigenous context when we're looking at health, is that the health of the land is directly tied to the health of the people. Right. So if you see land being, is degraded, is overgrazed, land that is war-torn, that will show you the health of the people itself. And so within our own communities, I see and I look around the landscape itself, for instance, and see that even though we as Indigenous people are stewards of the earth, or we as humans are steward, I can take a look at a landscape and say, okay, this will tell me the health of the society, the community itself. Right. And so health is very broad when you look at it. And I think overall, health relates to not only physical health, but spiritual and mental health too, which is very important.
Just maybe a minute or so. Aleena, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I would just add that, through our stories of emergence, it really establishes an ancestral relationship with the land. And so when we think of those relation, it's very bi-directional. It's based in reciprocity. We know that our life is dependent upon the things that are the animals and the plants and the things that are there, the water and the rivers and things that Lily talked about. And so in that, our life depends on them. Therefore, we also have to take care of them, and that is where the stewardship comes in. But I think when you have that ancestral connection to the land, then you do have an added, again, responsibility to care for it in a way where, you know, kind of the way civilization has moved today, where that land is just there for the taking. It doesn't have that sort of reciprocity that grounds the relationship and thinking about the future, and not just the next generation, but our grandchildren's grandchildren.
Well, thank you guys very much. It's hard to think that if we just had a tenth of that kind of mindset, we maybe wouldn't have the climate emergency we're having now, kind of thing. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.